Peace and stability are at the top of the agenda at the G7 meeting this week, according to Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly. She's gathering with her counterparts in Quebec for 2 days of talks, and while the focus is supposed to be finding a peaceful end to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, all eyes are on tensions between Canada and the United States. Emily Taylor joins us in studio with the latest. Emily?
Melanie Joly met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in a one-on-one meeting this morning ahead of her opening remarks. She told reporters yesterday that she plans to bring up tariffs in all of her conversations.
So, of course, peace and stability is on the top of our agenda.
In her opening remarks at this week's G7 meeting, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly tells her counterparts that peace and stability are their top priorities.
I think that here, as G7 foreign ministers, we must meet the moment, and it is up to us to do that task. And we should not be daunted by the task. I think we should be working together.
Joly says she's referring to Ukraine, the Middle East, Sudan, Venezuela, and several other nations. But most eyes are on how this peace and stability will play out between Canada and the United States, as U.S. President Donald Trump reiterates his threat yet again for Canada to become the 51st state.
If you look at a map, they drew an artificial line right through it between Canada and the U.S., keeping "O Canada," the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states.
Tensions between the two nations amid an escalating trade war and threats of annexation is not on the wider G7 agenda, as U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made clear yesterday at an airport in Ireland.
Should become the 51st state from an economic standpoint. He says if they became the 51st state, we wouldn't have to worry about the border and fentanyl coming across, because now we would be able to manage that. He's made an argument that it's their interest to do so. Obviously, the Canadians don't agree, apparently. But
do you agree with that? Should they be? Are we going to discuss that becoming the 50th?
Well, that's not what we're going to discuss at the G7.
But that hasn't stopped reporters from asking about it again today during the G7 family photo.
Mr. Rubio, is it appropriate for a G7 member to threaten the sovereignty of another G7 member?
And Minister Joly has said she'll be talking tariffs with the states and her British and European counterparts, telling reporters yesterday.
In every single meeting, I will raise the issue of tariffs to coordinate our response with the Europeans and to put pressure on the Americans.
The meeting of lawmakers comes the same day President Trump has threatened a 200% tariff on European wine and alcohol if the European Union doesn't back down from retaliating against U.S. steel and aluminum levies. And on the same day, Canada has announced an additional $30 billion in retaliation. Today, Italian's foreign minister saying a trade war isn't good for anyone. But a political analyst doesn't see any big wins coming out of these talks for Joly.
What's a win? I mean, all the European countries are opposed to the tariffs. Rubio isn't going to touch it. It's not his portfolio.
Professor Nelson Wiseman says tariffs were likely discussed extensively behind closed doors, but will likely never hear the details.
Because he can't be in a position where he suggests, oh, you know, this is just part of a negotiation, or it's Trump style. You know, I think it puts Rubio and a number of cabinet ministers in an uncomfortable position.
He believes instead most public talks will focus on Ukraine and a potential ceasefire deal brokered by the states. Whatever negotiations Rubio has made with Ukraine and Russia could be why the states has reportedly vetoed a Canadian proposal for the summit aimed at cracking down on Russian shadow fleet oil tankers that are evading Western economic sanctions.
I suspect nothing's going to happen for a week or so until we get some sort of response from Russia and how the U.S. feels about it, how the Ukrainians feel about it.
The ministers are scheduled to hold an early afternoon news conference tomorrow, capping off the talks. And then leaders of the G7 countries will gather in June, that's June 15th to 17th, for the official G7 summit in Alberta.